Okay, so in the last video we created this layout here. So we have our header, we have a nav bar, we have a sidebar, main content area, and another sidebar here. And we have a footer, and then these were two additional divs that we just assign here to the bottom, okay? So we've learned now how to stretch our divs to take up specific areas of our website, okay? So what we want to do now is that we want to talk about what we can do with content inside of divs, okay? So we've already gone through how we can add margins and paddings, and that to some degree allows us to control how objects are positioned. We've also touched on positioning, so we remember that we can position things relatively, absolutely, and so on. But there's another way of organizing content inside of divs that is a part of the display grid command that we can touch on, and that gives us a fair bit of control over how our content comes up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some additional content to this div here in the middle, this main div, this main content div, and we're going to try to organize that content using the same command I'm talking about. So I'm going to bring up Notepad, and let me see, I'm going to go to where I have my HTML, which is here, and I want to change this div here, okay? So this one that has the 4 in it. So I'm going to add some additional content. I'm going to add an image. So I'm going to add the same image that we would have had on our other HTML site here. So I'm going to click on this one here, my first website again, and I'm going to look for where we got our image. So we have our image right here. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste this here inside of this div, okay? So all I did there is I just went back to our original website, our first website. I copied the link that we used to connect an image to the website, and I'm pasting that into this div, okay? So we have some text. Sorry, not some text. We have a heading. We have an image, and now I'm going to add a paragraph to it. So I'm just going to put, this is a test paragraph for CSS grid layout for, let me just put for a CSS grid layout, okay? Good. So good. So I have 3 sets of content inside of this div. I have a heading, I have an image, and I have a paragraph, okay? So let me save and refresh, and let's see what's happening. Good. So I have my heading, my image, and my paragraph. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back to my CSS here, and what I want to do is that I want to make some changes now inside of my content div here, okay? So the command we have here already is to assign this to a particular grid area, right? So that's how we made sure that this div is occupying this space, right? If you remember, when we did that, we were defining the grid areas up here, the grid template areas here, and that's how we were assigning these values. Well, these spaces, I should say. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to add some more code here. I'm going to add display grid. So I'm going to display this as grid also. Good. And so now I've set this to display as grid. And I'm going to start to add some commands here. But first I want to show you something. So I'm going to minimize this. And what I want to do is that I want to do something called inspecting the web page. And this is something that we're going to use. We're going to use it now, obviously, and we're going to use it in subsequent chapters covering other things. And it's a very useful tool. So I'm going to right click. I'm going to come down to inspect. Good. So you can see here that we have all sorts of information about our web page here. We have information on the padding and the borders and the margins here. There's a lot of stuff here, but for now, and we're going to go through this in more detail as we move on, but for now, I want to focus here where we can see that it has pretty much a breakdown of the content on my web page. So you can see here that right now I'm hovering over the container div that I have all of these other divs in. Here I'm hovering over the header. And you can see that as I hover over different parts of the website, you can see that it highlights those parts and it gives me some information. You can see here that as I hover over header, it is showing me that it's a div with the ID header, and I know that that's the ID because it has the hashtag on it. So remember that the hashtag symbolizes IDs. And then next to that, it gives me the size of that particular div. Okay, so the size of that div is 948 pixels wide by 200 pixels tall. Okay, but what I want to do is I want to focus here on our content div where we're working right now. Okay, so we can see now that it's currently highlighting that content div, and as we continue to work on it, it's going to display some information that's going to be very useful to us. Okay, so I'm going to come back here. I didn't save this, so notice. So look at it before I save it. So you see here that it's highlighting it as one solid block. And you can also see that it's highlighting the grid gaps that I have and everything. So it's a very useful tool. It shows you a lot of information. So I'm going to come back here and I'm going to save this after now I've displayed this as grid. So now I'm going to refresh this. And you can see here that my content has been shifted a slight bit. And let's see what it's showing here. So if you look here, the display, the overlay that it overlays on top of the different divs has changed, okay? We noticed that I was highlighting the different divs all the time, right? And now the highlighting for this div has changed. This div has now been separated into 3 rows, okay? So we have a row at the top, and that row contains our our heading. We have a row in the middle, and that row contains our image. And we have a row at the bottom, and that row contains our paragraph. So what happens when we display our divs as grid is that every individual element within that div then occupies a particular row, okay? And what we can do is that we can use these separations of the different parts of the div into rows to organize how our content is displayed. And we'll go into that now. Okay, so you can see here that by default, the content appears to go to the upper left corner of our div, well, of the different rows. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to get the content to come to a more central position, okay? So to do that, there's this command. You have justify dash items, and then you can say to the center. Now I can save that and see what happens. Refresh. So now we can see that my items have been pulled towards the horizontal center of their rows, okay? Well, and another thing to take note of here is that each element has its individual row, but they're all on one column, okay? So a better way of saying this is that they've been pulled to the center of their column, okay? So now they're in the center. So that command was justify items to center. You can also do it to the start. So justify items start, save, refresh. And we can see that this is the default, okay? This is how it was originally. So now the items have been pulled to the left, okay? So you have start, center, and you also have end. So I can come here and I can put end, save, refresh. And now they've been pulled to the right side, okay? So I'm going to put this back on center. And that is how we can move items around in terms of their horizontal positioning, okay? So justify items. We also have align items, align dash items. And this allows us to position our element, well, this allows us to affect the vertical positioning of our elements now, okay? So again, if I come back here and I highlight, you can see that the elements are not centrally positioned, positioned in terms of their vertical alignment. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do that. I'm going to make it come to the center. So now they're in the center. They should be in the center with regards to their horizontal positioning and their vertical positioning. So now let me save this and let me refresh this. And we can see that that's what's happening, okay? So if I highlight here again, we can see that the items are now positioned horizontally to the center and vertically to the center, okay? And we can also do the same start and end commands here. So I can put it to go up to the top of its row, go to the top of their rows I should say, because they're all in their own row. So we can see here that they've now been pushed to the top of their rows, okay? And we can also push them to the bottom of their rows. So I can come here and I can put end, save, refresh. And you can see now that the content has been pushed down to the bottom of the rows, okay? So that's how you get the content to move around in their respective columns and rows, okay? So I'm going to put them back on the center again. Save. But what you might be asking, the question you might be asking yourself now is that this is all well and good. It allows us to position the elements within their particular columns and rows. But suppose you want the items to come, for example, to the center, okay? So when we use these commands in this way, they're not coming to the center of the div, okay? And that sometimes is what would be appropriate depending on what you want for your particular layout, okay? Now to fix that, what you can do is that you can start to play with the actual space that the different elements are able to move around in. So we can see that there's some boundaries around each of our elements, okay? We call that the row, okay? So we can actually adjust these boundaries of this column and these rows, and we can bring them in, and we can push them around. And let me show you what I mean by that. So if I come back to my CSS here, and I put in justify dash content to the start or to the left, let's see what's going to happen here. So if I save this and I refresh this, so we can see here that the content has been pulled to the left. Let's see how it looks here. So we can see that the highlighted area has now been restricted to the left side of our div, right? So the elements are now only able to move around on this left side, okay? Because the space that they're allowed to move in has been restricted to that side. So now if I adjusted the other values, if I adjusted, for example, my justify items command, let's say I wanted to put this now to the end again, okay? Let's see what's going to happen. So if I save this and I refresh, you can see here that whereas before we were able to put the items up against the right side edge here of our div, now they have been restricted to this section here, and that's because if I highlight it, you can see that that is the edge of this area here has been restricted to that point, okay? So that's something to keep in mind, right? We can adjust the individual elements within the rows, and we can also adjust the rows themselves, okay? The rows and the columns themselves using these different commands. So that's justify content to start. I can also push it to the other side, to the right side. So I can put end, save that, refresh, and now it's on this side, and the restriction is on that side of the div, okay? Alternatively, I can say justify content to the center. And I can save that and refresh. Oh, hang on. I forgot to change this to center again. I'm going to change this to center. Good. And we can see here that this doesn't show much of a change from what we had originally, okay? And the reason for that is that what this has done is that this has constructed the content to the center, constricted the content to the center, but before we already had the content constricted to the center in a sense anyway. So the individual items were lined up to the center, but now all we've done is that we've just brought in the sides of their area closer to them, okay, closer to where they were anyway, okay. So you're not going to see much of a change there, okay. So if I wanted to get these items to be central now, what I would have to do is I would have to use this command but with the alignment instead. So I would have to come here and I'd have to say align to center, align content to center, save, refresh. And we can see now that what's happened is that it's brought in the width of the rows right onto our elements, okay? So that's pretty much how you can start adjusting your content using these different commands. And as you can see here, you can adjust your content to either the left side or the right side or top or bottom, depending on how you want to organize your content, okay?